Well, good afternoon. Today's budget forecast shows a $3.7 billion surplus in the current biennium, a $616 million positive balance in the upcoming budget cycle, and our highest budget reserve to date, with another $3.5 billion set aside. Over the last 10 years, over the budgets that Democrats have helped to enact, you have seen DFL leadership has led to budget surpluses and large reserves. The pro-worker policies of the last 2 years will benefit Minnesotans for years to come and ensure they have even more opportunities and tools to build better lives for themselves and their families. In just a few weeks, on January 1st, even more DFL policies will kick into effect to help families afford their lives, including banning junk fees and capping copays on insulin, inhalers, and EpiPens at $25 for a 1-month supply. As we look ahead to the next legislative session, DFLers will continue supporting workers and families because we know that's the best way to build a strong economy. While corporate profits continue to grow, as shown in this forecast, Minnesota workers are not receiving their fair share of the wealth that they create. We have to focus on lowering costs, reducing stress in people's lives, and building an economy with jobs that have wages and benefits that can support a family. There are a lot of cautionary notes and uncertainty in this forecast, especially in the long-term portion of the forecast. The American Recovery and Reinvestment Act accomplished its mission, and the U.S. economy weathered the COVID pandemic and its aftermath. It's clear that post-COVID spending patterns are returning to the pre-COVID patterns, where we're spending more on services, which are generally not taxed. We're spending less on goods, which are generally taxed, and we're seeing that in the state budget. And with consumer purchases moving back to services, you can see that impact on the state budget. DFLers enacted a policy change to incorporate inflation into the budget, which provides us with a much more realistic and honest picture of our budget and the ongoing costs of providing just level services to Minnesotans. While the long-term forecast shows reason for concern, there are also significant concerns about what a second Trump administration could do to Minnesota's economy. We saw in the first Trump administration devastating impact of the trade wars that Trump started on Minnesota's agricultural sector. We know also that Donald Trump has enacted tax cuts that have benefited billionaires and corporations at the expense of everyone else. And potentially devastating cuts to education could be coming to hit our schools hard. For state policymakers, it's our job to look at these cautionary notes, those long-term investments in special education, the long-term costs of those disability waivered services, as well as the threats posed by Trump's proposed economic policies, and take those into account over the next 2-year budgeting cycle. I am confident that we will do what we have done over the previous cycles, which is to responsibly manage Minnesota's budget to leave long-term economic stability and surpluses. I think leaving $3.7 billion on the bottom line in the current biennium was an act of fiscal discipline and was important. And when you look at this biennium and the next one, the ones that we were most responsible for shaping in the previous budget session, we left Minnesota in really strong condition, and we are up to the task of managing these long-term risks in the future. I'll turn it over to Senate Majority Leader Erin Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Tenure in this work provides both a sightline and the experience necessary to manage what we face now and into the future. I grew up in a middle-class family, and as Speaker Hortman spoke to the fact that we left a fair amount of money on the bottom line, that is a tradition I grew up with in my family. There was always money set aside for a rainy day. We do that by policy, and we did that by choice in the last budget cycle, and that's why we start this budget cycle with a strong surplus and a strong reserve fund. Over the last 2 years, I joined my colleagues in the Senate and in the House to make sure that we were doing all that we could do to improve the lives of Minnesotans. And we made wise investments in their lives because we knew they were struggling with the cost of things like housing and childcare and food security and health care. And as a result of the work that we have done over the last 2 years, Minnesotans' lives are better. and we are better prepared together to weather what we are going to experience in the next 2 years as we balance a budget for the people of Minnesota, knowing and anticipating the things that we're going to see coming from Washington, D.C. The threat of tariffs, which will increase costs for Minnesotans, the threat of mass deportations, which will remove workers and increase costs for Minnesotans, and most certainly budget cuts, steep ones coming from Washington, D.C., that will impact our budget. We don't see those yet in our forecast, and we have important work to do. But the experience that I have, the experience with Speaker Hortman over the last couple of decades, shows us that whether we are facing structural surplus or structural imbalance, that we know our job is to balance the budget, and we're going to do that with our values at the center. As Governor Walz spoke to, the highest areas of increase right now are in special education funding and the care of people with disabilities in long-term care. Our core values support that work and the people who care for them and teach them. And so we do have difficult choices in front of us, and as we have every single time, we consider the tools before us to make sure that we're making the best decisions, but with firm and clear commitment to the well-being of Minnesotans, those in our schools, those in our hospitals and long-term care facilities, those who are living in their homes, our families and our communities across the state, because we know the work that we do to balance this budget is core to the well-being of our economy and the lives of Minnesotans, and we take that work very seriously. So I am proud to be here today to represent our caucus and know that they are over in the Senate office building right now, preparing for the work that we're going to do next session to make sure that we are able to deliver on a budget that continues to support Minnesotans, their future, and the fiscal well-being of the state. And with that, we're happy to take your questions. Thank you.
Looking to try and balance that fiscal year 28-29 deficit.
Can you repeat your question? I couldn't hear you.
Where are you guys looking to first to try and balance that fiscal year 28-29 deficit?
Go ahead.
Well, I think it's really important to note that the budget that we are tasked with balancing this year is the 26-27. The 28-29 is beyond a horizon where we budget for. So the next session that we're going into, we have the projected $900 million cost of inflation to keep level services, and then a $616 million projected positive balance for that time period. So we certainly have our eyes on 28 and 29, but it would be very premature to start budgeting for a budget period that's beyond the horizon. It's in a horizon, as you heard the state budget director say, that only 19 states even look at. So it's really smart for Minnesota to take a look at those years, but we're not going to be enacting that budget this year.
I suppose a better way to phrase that would maybe be, how do you cut spending to prepare for that?
So, we have been in this place before. I remember my second or third term, we had a $6 billion budget deficit. And we worked with Minnesotans, and we worked with legislators and the administration at the time to make sure that we could balance the budget. It was very, very difficult work, but we did it. We've got our eyes set on the budget that we need to set for these next 2 years. We're in strong financial position to do that work. We will have our eye on the next 28 and 29. We have to. We have to understand what's driving it, and we have to understand how to rectify that. We will do that work.
For both of you, the governor mentioned those two areas, and you mentioned them as well, these areas of spending that had a lot of growth: long-term care, disability waivers, special education. Those are really hard to save money, both for federal rules, and these are very sympathetic constituencies for all of your members. Is that really someplace you can look to, as the governor suggested, to save money? Or do you have to go look at that 24% of the budget that isn't in HHS and education?
Yeah, I think we always, Peter, have to take a look at everything, and we have to be balanced in our approach. We have known, right, that these budget increases, especially when we think about people with disabilities in long-term care, were growing. They've been growing over time. And I will say the legislature has done a lot of work to make sure that we are doing right by Minnesotans with disabilities and the people who care for them. And we're seeing the result of that in some budget growth. So that's where we have to look. But we will be wise in terms of the entirety of the budget to make sure that we're not making cuts that slow growth in the economy or hurt families. And this is a place where we have to look.
Senator Murphy, you mentioned that you've been here before, but this administration has not. This governor has seen surplus after surplus. He's in a very different position as well as the entire administration. Can you address that stark change coming?
I think that, Governor Walz served in Congress for 10 years before he ran for governor, so he's very familiar with the work that we do to balance the budget both here and there. So I don't have any doubt that we are going to work closely with the administration as we have over these last 6 years, to make sure that the budget is balanced.
And Madam Speaker,
what I
you
would
have
just
to
say-
work with a new equal, a speaker designate as well as a speaker designate. And she's already said state agencies should be put on notice. No more growth, no more expansion. What about her saying that already?
Well, I think you have to look at the entire state budget, and as the governor said, everything's on the table. But if you look at the entire Department of Natural Resources, for example, their whole budget is maybe $200 million in a biennium. The Department of Agriculture, closer to $100 million. Minnesota Housing Finance Agency in the tens of millions. So when you look at really getting a hold of the growth area in services to folks with disabilities and services to senior citizens, you have to look at the biggest areas of spending if you're actually going to tackle the problem in front of us. So I think we have to figure out, how do we take care of people, especially the most vulnerable, and the people who care for them. I mean, when this is the hardest work that there is, and do that in a way that respects those people and the values that we have, that we have the resources to take care of those folks. It will be a very tough job to figure out how to manage it for the long term. But I think our values say we are going to take care of those folks, but we are going to have to be really innovative in those big budget areas. Because even if you eliminated the Department of Agriculture and the DNR and the PCA and honestly the AG and the legislature and the governor's budget, you don't make a dent when you're talking about billions of dollars.
Do you agree with the governor that everything has to be on the table as you prepare for 4 years down the road, including spending cuts or tax increases?
Well, I think you have to look at the February forecast first, right? This forecast is not kind of the definitive one that the legislature takes action on. The reason why the February forecast is it has the year-end numbers, so it's more of a truing up. We should have some idea what's happening with the Trump administration, so we might have better data there. But I think you also have to take into account that this is a long time into the future. This is a look that we're getting, a light that we're turning on a future period that most states don't look at. So it gives us time to prepare. What I would say is what the governor said, this is not theoretical. He's got a 6-year track record of balancing budgets and producing surpluses. Not many governors and legislatures in the country would have left $3.7 billion on the bottom line intentionally. So that's generally not how government budgeting works, but we did that so that we're armed for the future. And when you couple that with the $3.5 billion, the highest budget reserve we've ever had, we are in the best condition possible to weather whatever happens in the near term or the long term.
Speaker designate by in this upcoming session, wait till next year, or how are you advising them to move forward?
So I think it is always important that we are working alongside Minnesotans, and we had great success in the last couple of years working alongside Minnesotans to put a budget together with them at the center of that. We will continue that work. They will inform us as well. Some of the best ideas when I have faced a difficult budget situation has come from the people of Minnesota. And they're as smart as we are. They see exactly what we see, and I have a lot of confidence in our ability alongside them.
And Madam Speaker Designate, I understand what you're saying, that the long-term care and the special ed portion of it is a big chunk of it, right? You could get rid of all the rest and you still possibly might not correct that problem. Given that that's coming up, it's not going away, what kind of things are you looking at? Are we talking about more rigorous means testing? Are we talking about changing eligibility requirements? I understand we have to be innovative, but there's only so many things in the toolbox you can do. I know you don't want to commit 4 years ahead of time, okay? But what kind of things might potentially people, I don't know, my age or older, who are going into that group, what might you be looking at?
Well, we just got these numbers today, and so all of those things will be things we'll be looking at for the whole next legislative session. Yeah.
Can you give me anything a little bit more to grab onto than that?
It's
Senator
going to be
Murphy,
a really
maybe?
exciting session in the House with the bipartisan leadership. That I can give you.
Fraud and program. It's a something Republicans have raised. Can you address that? What
Yeah,
think
you
about
know,
that?
we took that issue very seriously in the legislature. I was the chair of state and local government. We put in place policies back in 2023 to give the legislature and the agencies more power to detect and root out fraud. Really, really proud of that work. My Republican colleagues voted for it for the most part, but they don't talk about it very much. We take that issue very seriously. I also don't think that is going to that's the place where we're going to find the savings we need in 4 years to balance the budget.
The other thing I would say, I would just echo the governor on that, which is that most of those folks are in prison now. And I think that U.S. Attorney Andy Lugar did a phenomenal job prosecuting those cases. And when people violate the law, they should be held accountable, and they are held accountable. Probably last question, we'll turn it over to the Republicans.
Yeah, are either of you interested in holding hearings into suspected fraud in the state's autism program that we've heard about over the last few months?
That will be a decision that will be made by the chairs in those areas, but I think if there is evidence that they want to look at, they will have hearings on that.
Thank you.